The following stories involve truckers, road trips, and eerie encounters while on the road. Please leave a comment if you like and hit that subscribe button as it definitely helps out the channel. Not my personal experience, but my uncle lives out deep in rural Oregon. He told me this story where he was driving to work really early in the morning to a small town about 30 minutes away. There was a bit of traffic just outside of town, so he stopped behind another car. There was super heavy fog this morning, like Silent Hill quality, really thick, so he could just see the backlights of the car in front of him. After following the car very slowly for a while, the car stops once more in traffic. My uncle sits there and waits for about 20 minutes. The car still hasn't moved. All he can see is the headlights in front of him. Eventually he gets out to see what's the matter. When my uncle gets out and walks to the car in front of him, he sees the entire front of the car completely totaled. Inside was the dead driver. The back part of the car was completely fine, and my uncle did not even know the thing was wrong earlier due to the fog. The story always unsettled me when I had to drive in the fog. I was once driving late from San Antonio to Houston down I-10, probably about midnight. Along this road there's an access road that runs mostly parallel to the interstate and veers off at an overpass every now and then. When the road veers off, the overpass, which is usually tall enough to let tractor trailers through, has a pretty steep incline of dirt and concrete forming the hill. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I'm driving down the road sort of caravanning with my friend, except he was about 10 miles back because he stopped at Buc-ee's to get gas, so he was far behind me. I noticed that there is a car driving at the same speed as me on the access road, veering off at every overpass until I can't see him anymore, and then speeding back up and driving alongside me again and again. First, I'm sort of worried because I think it's a cop. I had a gram with me but hadn't gotten a chance to smoke yet. At one point, the car once again veers off and then back parallel with me until he just takes off going well over 100 miles per hour, I'm sure, because I was already going 75 to 80 miles per hour. An overpass was coming and I expected him to veer off again, except he didn't. He just drove straight on and ramped off the overpass, catching what looked like 15 to 20 feet in the air, not to mention the height of the overpass already. I was still behind him, so I lost sight of him on the other side because I hadn't passed under the overpass yet, but when I did pass under, I didn't see anything. Nothing at all. No wreckage, no fire, no trees, bushes, ditches, nothing. It was like it hadn't happened. I pulled off and turned around and looked around the area and I couldn't find any evidence. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. But the weirder part is my friend told me he saw the same car doing the same thing when he got to that stretch of the road, only he never saw the car commit suicide like I did. I had just merged into I-25 from US 36 in Denver, and even though the speed limit is 55 miles per hour, nobody drives that slow. Because of the amount of traffic that merges on at the next on-ramp, I usually moved over one more lane. I did this as usual, and a silver Pontiac Aztek had let me into the lane. I gave them a thank you wave, and just then the pickup in front of me hits his brakes hard, and so do I. The truck then swerved to the right just in time for me to see the cars in front of him stopped. I swerved to the left while still braking without looking. I missed the car in that lane thankfully, but I looked in my mirror and saw the Pontiac Aztek had clipped one of the cars that was stopped. When it did, it spun and then went into the side of the same car. I called 911 and let them know of the accident, then got off the highway at 58th Avenue and came back around as a witness for the police. When I got back to the site, traffic was stopped and someone had already got out to check on people. I didn't see it right away because of where I parked, but when I got out of my truck, there was a guy standing at the driver's side of the Aztek crying, and he had put his jacket over the driver's head. This person was killed from head trauma when their head hit the window. If only I had not been selfish about traffic merging ahead, this person would have had more stopping room and more distance to react. By the way, I'm not a truck driver, but I do drive around Denver and surrounding areas all day for work. Back in the early mid-1970s, my mother and I lived in the Pacific Northwest. I was about 6 years old. We were on an offbeat road right out of Seattle. Very dark night. No moon and a wisp of fog. We saw a Volkswagen Beetle on the side of the road with their emergency flashers on, and a rather good-looking guy, as my mom describes him, with his arm in a sling waving us down. My mom pulled over, being the kind of woman that would help anybody in need, and he looked normal. Mom rolled down her window and asked if she could help, and the guy asked my mom if she could help him get the last lug nut off his tire so he could change his flat. So my mother introduces herself and he said, "Hello, my name is Ted," and then smiled and looked at me, reached over and shook my hand and asked my name. I think I got the bad vibe as well because I said nothing to him. My mom said something about his smile really made her uncomfortable. Then she noticed that he was missing the passenger seat in his Beetle. So she rolls the window back up and said she would call a tow truck to come help him at the next city, and then speeds away. While looking in the rearview mirror, she sees him taking off the sling and getting back in the Beetle and took off very fast in the opposite direction. So that's the night at 6 years old I shook the hand of Ted Bundy. None of these are trucking stories, but they do involve long commutes on country roads. My sis worked about an hour and a half away from my mom's, where she was temporarily staying, at this time, which was bad because she has a bad habit of falling asleep in cars. So on nights that she worked really late, I made her promise to call me and I'd stay up and talk to her until she got home. One night, late, I'm on the phone with her and out of nowhere she starts screaming. She finally gets out some semblance of a sentence telling me there was a girl covered in blood crawling out of a ditch onto the road. She pulls the car back around and jumps out of the car and runs to her, the phone falling out on the ground. I'm still listening. I hear the girl start sobbing and tell her, "Oh God, not you. Not you. I need help. They're coming back. They're coming back for me." My sister, at this point, thinks this girl might have a mental issue because of how frantic and disconnected her thoughts are. But because while she keeps saying she needs help, she doesn't seem to think my sister could help her. In hindsight, I think the girl saw my 5'9", 100-pound sister with her high-pitched voice and thought that they could easily kill her too. From here, besides screaming and broken glass, I can only tell it from her side. She sees this truck pulling up and is about to wave them down when the girl goes crazy and starts clawing and pleading with my sis to run. The truck puts on its brights and two very big men jump out of the car and start walking towards them, making clicking cat-calling sounds, and my sister's blood turns to ice. She reaches over, grabs the girl, because there's no way in hell she's leaving her, and in a whirlwind manages to force her into the car and jump in herself before the men reach the car and start smashing her lights. She speeds off, clipping one of them, and is followed by this truck trying to run her off the road for about half an hour. They only pull away when she reaches a hospital. Inside, the girl was in a panic and wouldn't let my sister leave her with the doctors. She kept saying she was her best friend and repeating her name over and over. From the doctors, my sister learned that this girl was repeatedly raped and then tied up and dragged behind the truck. To add to the creepiness, once my sister got home, she looked at her name tag and remembered that she had left hers at home and had borrowed an ex-employee's tag, Stephanie. And yet, despite my sis saying she didn't recall ever not fearing for her life enough to get to the formalities and exchange names, the girl had called her by her real name. I was driving a shortcut from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 29 Palms is located in the desolate high desert east of LA. The shortcut was all 2-lane road through total nothingness except for passing through Amboy, California. Amboy is a nearly abandoned town, nearly as far below sea level as Death Valley, with a dormant volcano and lava field on one side and a salt flat on the other. It was also at the time the hotspot for satanic group activity. So I was driving by myself in the afternoon, stopped in Amboy and snapped a picture of the city sign just to prove I was there with 2 friends who dared me to take that route to I-40. I got back in my car and proceeded to drive up into the mountain range between Amboy and I-40. Once I reached the top, I am driving north through a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. Up ahead, I see some stuff in the middle of the road. As I approach, I slow down to see a red Pontiac Fiero stop sideways across both lanes. Suitcase open with clothes scattered everywhere, and 2 bodies laying face down in the road, a man and a woman. I stop 100 feet or so away, and the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Being a Marine, I reach under the seat and pull out a 9mm pistol and chamber around. Something seemed very wrong. It looked too perfect, as if it were staged. An ambush? Was I being paranoid? Something was just wrong. Getting out of the car seemed unthinkable. It was the horror movie move. As I scanned the road, I saw a line I could drive. Past the guy on the road on his left, swerve to the right side of the woman. Behind the Fiero, and I'd be on the other side. I dropped it into first gear, punched it, and drove the line I planned. I passed the back of the Fiero without hitting it or either of the bodies on the road. I continued forward a couple 100 feet and slowed down so I could breathe and let my heart slow down. As I looked up into the rearview mirror, I saw that the 2 bodies had gotten up to their knees and 20 or so people emerged from the tall grass on either side of the road by the car and the bodies. At that moment, my right foot smashed the gas pedal to the floor and did not let up until I had to slow down for the I-40 East on-ramp. I will never know what would have happened to me had I gotten out of the car to check on the bodies or stopped my car closer to them. Somehow I do not think it would have been good. Sometimes real life can be scarier than a movie. Mid-90s, I went on a road trip with my son, and for some stupid reason decided to take a different route home than the one I had taken previously and was familiar with. Turned out the new route was a super desolate road. I specifically chose to drive in the middle of the night so my son would be sleeping and there'd be less traffic. It was probably 3 a.m. and of course my POS car breaks down. By some luck of the draw, I'm almost right in front of an abandoned roadside market and was able to coast into the parking lot. The windows are all boarded up on the market. Steam is pouring out from under my hood, and it was essentially the start to every single dumb chick breaks down in the middle of nowhere and gets hacked to death movie you've ever seen. All of a sudden, I see headlights coming around the bend. I'd been driving on this road for a couple of hours and had seen maybe 2 other vehicles the whole time. A truck drives past, slows down, then I see the reverse lights come on in my rearview mirror. Deliverance banjo music starts to play in my head. The truck pulls up so our vehicles are window to window, and I see the driver is an older man, and he's just staring at me. Looks like the stereotypical serial killer you visualize. Long, scraggly gray hair, grizzled stubble, sort of crazy eyes. He motions for me to roll down my window. I'm just trying to look anywhere but directly at him and acting like I don't see him and everything's fine and dandy. Oh no, I'm not in any distress. Please ignore the steam coming from my car. I'm good. Thanks anyway. He backs up a little, parks, and gets out of his truck and starts walking towards my car. I'm thinking this is where my son and I end up on a news story about bodies being found in the boonies when the snow melts, and he starts yelling, "I'm not going to hurt you. Roll down your window." I keep looking anywhere but at him while trying to give off a strong, "you don't want to fuck with me" vibe. In reality, I'm about shitting my pants. He gives me a disgusted look, walks to his truck and starts digging around. He comes walking back with tools in his hands, and now I'm thinking, oh my god, he's got tools. He's gonna kill me and bust out my teeth and cut my fingers off so I can't be identified. He yells,
"Open the hood."
I'm looking everywhere but at him.
"Open the hood, let me see what's wrong."
He's pissed. I'm scared shitless, but I reach down and pop the hood. He opens it and I crouch down so I can see him through a couple of inches where the hood is open. He looks up and we make eye contact and I about die. He looks down and keeps doing whatever he's doing. He goes back and forth between his truck and my car a couple times, bringing more tools, some jug of something and other things I can't make out. After about 15 minutes, he closes my hood and yells at me to start it up. My car sputters a little, turns over, and then seems fine. He yells, "Be careful, there's a lot of weirdos out here." Gets in his truck, gives me one last disgusted look, and drives off. My car made it home. My dad looked it over after I told him the story and deducted the guy had changed a radiator hose. My dad pointed out many times that the chances of me being struck by lightning were probably better than my chances of some random guy in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night happened to be driving around with a radiator hose and the tools to replace it for whatever 10-plus-year-old piece of shit foreign car I'd been driving was. The most disturbing thing that's ever happened to me was on a long drive back to college for my last semester before graduation. I am a night person and was leaving kind of late for the drive but was expecting to get in around midnight. Being that I would be living on my own after school, I was feeling a little bit sentimental as it felt like I was leaving home for the last time. Home was somewhere else now. So it's sunset as I'm driving towards the highway and there's a beautiful low fog in the fields along the road catching the light. I decide around then that it'd be nice to try a far more scenic back roads route than the typical turnpike stuff, so I decided to cut off towards West Virginia. I stop at a diner, get gas, and then proceed towards the WV line as night falls. This is the last human contact I make for the rest of the drive. I didn't foresee it, but an immense dense fog dropped over Appalachia that night, slowing my drive considerably. At some points in the mountains, there was a scarcely 10 or 15 feet visibility, but there are some small towns the road leads me through. It's Friday night, though, and it begins to feel oddly dead in each town I pass through. It'd be 9 or 10 p.m. and the local bars would look closed. There were no lights on in any of the houses. I felt uneasy, but maybe that's just how it is there. Anyway, I'm making terribly slow progress with the fog and the back roads at night. Deer sightings keeping my foot a little light when the fog wasn't too bad. But at some points I'd have nosed my way through foggy intersections unsure if I'd find the other side. It was almost impassably dense at times, and the trip would take double the estimated time to arrive because of it. I'm often driving around 25 miles per hour or worse, trying to be safe, and it's around 1 or 2 a.m., and there's no cell phone service as I get into large national forest. There's no other traffic around, there has been a little all night, so I decide to pull over to pee, leaving the engine on for whatever reason. It'd be a quick stop. I'm not fearless by any means, but I try not to let myself get too jumpy in the woods at night. But as I'm coming around the car undoing my belt, I hear voices, maybe 40 or 50 yards into the forest. And then there's a scrambling through the dead leaves and a brush coming in my direction. It's pitch black, night, no street lights or houses, national forest, cloudy, foggy, starless, moonless night. And I can't see anything off of the road beyond the red glow of the taillights. Feeling sufficiently freaked out and not willing to find out more, I bolt back to the driver's side and floor it up the next hill, happy I had left my car on anyway. My heart is pounding. I never find out more about this little scare, and I'm glad for that. A little while longer, I'm heading up some steep mountains and nearing an old fire watchtower from WW2 days. There's a plaque, roughly, about it being a community morale builder to have built it even if it didn't affect the war in any way. I pulled into the overlook to actually pee because I never got the chance earlier. Now that I'm atop a sizable mountain, I suddenly get cell service and a string of concerned texts from my mom, freaking out asking if I made it okay. By this time I should have been at my house hours ago, but I took a long and unfamiliar way in the dark and intense mist. Knowing that she won't go to sleep until I'm there, because she's like that, I respond that I'm safely home, hoping that it will end it. She immediately calls and asks where I am, and I can't really ignore her call having just texted her. I tell her I'm home, and she asks, "In Virginia?" And I say, "Yeah, in my college town," despite being at the top of a mountain in a national forest in West Virginia. She sounds deeply unsettled and says she's been trying to call me repeatedly while I had no service. I ask why, and she says she got a really weird phone call from West Virginia, but way west of where you should have been, which is where I actually was. She said she got this phone call and a gruff young man in a backwoods sounding voice and was telling her he needed to speak to me and swearing at her and saying all these nasty things. She said she heard people in the background screaming and people laughing. She hung up and called me a few times, but it went straight to voicemail. She typed the number in Google and saw it was from West Virginia and knew I was at least passing through a small part of it and called the number back. Small child answered and swore at her, then the earlier voice ripped the phone back and started saying my name again, saying that he needed to speak to me. This is especially strange because I was driving my dad's car and I'm not registered to it, so even if they saw my plates somewhere and could run them, they'd get his name. I think I even paid with cash at the diner and gas station way back near the start of the 5+ hour drive earlier and in another state. Can't think of anything I could have dropped with my name on it when I'd stepped out of the car briefly earlier during the recent incident. I still had all my cards and my ID. It would be an incredibly strange coincidence or extremely elaborate scare prank either way. I do my best to reassure my mom I have no idea what that could be about and that it must be a weird coincidence. I tell her I'm at my house and I'm okay despite how troubling I found all this in reality. She gives me a half-hearted okay and we say goodnight. Pull out of the watchtower, pull off and continue on to Virginia. Never have I been so comforted by 3 a.m. drags of late-night parties, students stumbling home at a nearby university town off a highway I know well from my usual route. I carry on to that highway and make it safely, and things have been completely normal since. But I have never brought it up with my mom again, nor have I ever had the heart to tell her where I was driving that night, or how late, or of the voices in the woods. There's no climax, no resolution. I'm trying to forget. On my way home from a rather long trip with my mother, we got to a bridge where we saw an elderly woman in a white nightgown. Think Grandma Death Roberta Sparrow from Donnie Darko. It was fall, so rather cool, and the sun was already setting behind the trees, so the white nightgown really showed in the dark. She was just walking. Problem was that she was barefoot and completely clean, like nothing had touched her at all. We had been on this road before the bridge for at least 10 miles, and we had another 15 before we got to anything that even resembled civilization. It's the road and ample trees for miles and miles around. We stopped and asked her where she was going and if she was with anyone. Kept mumbling to herself, but I remember her eyes. Her eyes were wide as if she'd just seen something frightening. The whites of her eyes were bleached white and the pupil was straight jet black. She never made eye contact with us and just kept walking forward. We drove off and called the police. We both kept expecting her car or someone to be on the road ahead, but there was no one at all. Stuff like that doesn't happen at all there, so it was pretty startling to say the least. Very plausible that it was dementia or something along those lines, but once more, walking on foot so many miles deep on this road is just unheard of. If anything, that scared us more. I remember on a long road trip, 14 plus hours with my dad to Colorado, we saw a car barrel past us at like 100 something. Keep in mind it was about 9 o'clock and we were still hours behind schedule and had a long way to go with a short time to get there. Now it isn't odd to see bad speeders on the road, but since we were in the middle of nowhere, we had no idea where this guy came from. We continued driving for a few minutes and saw another car speed past us at about the same speed. Funny thing was, it looked like the same car. Same color, same model SUV. We shrugged it off as a coincidence and continued. About the same amount of time had passed and we saw it again passing us. That time we were very sure it was the same car. This pattern continued twice more before my dad pulled off into a motel to spend the night and delay our trip. My dad is usually a very sensible person that's hard to scare, but I've never seen his face so ashen and afraid. He's never talked to me about the incident since, and doesn't allow me to drive after 9:30.